everybody, and welcome to Parks Bros. It's Drew here, and the moment you've all been waiting for has come, and this is my personal top 25 coasters. Now, I did one of these lists earlier in the year of a top 10, but that was just before going on my biggest trip of the year, and that was over to Ohio and northern Pennsylvania to go check out Cedar Point as well as Waldameer. But also a big change between those two lists is the fact that I went from 86 coasters ridden before doing the list to 109. So it's a pretty big jump. And when I asked you guys multiple times, you all said you wanted a top 25 instead of top 10, which I am totally happy to do. But do remember, all of these rankings are my personal opinion, and do keep in mind they are ever changing. Literally, as I'm recording this video, I am still changing the rankings around. So don't take this as written law or anything. But with that, let's just jump right into it. I do want to mention some honorable coasters that did not quite make the cut, and those include Colossus the Fire Dragon, Viper, Montezuma's Revenge, Flight Deck at California's Great America to be more specific, and Riddler's Revenge at Magic Mountain. Those 5 coasters are very close to being in my top 25, but sadly just missed the cut. But don't be surprised if some of those coasters jump up a little farther in the future. But speaking of big jumps, let's head into 25, which jumped majorly for me in the past 6 months, and that is Batman the Ride at Six Flags Magic Mountain. Oh my goodness, in the back left or back right seats of this coaster, it is one of the most intense experiences I have ever had. It's so whippy and forceful and just crazy that I had to put it on my list. My only problem with the ride itself is that it's quite short, but besides that, super enjoyable and super intense and super smooth as well. So Batman at Magic Mountain has officially made my top 25. But moving on to 24, we have another B&M coaster, this time a floorless, and this at Six Flags Discovery Kingdom. MEDUSA is my 24th favorite coaster. It has some awesome inversions as well as a great first drop. But man, this ride is just super enjoyable. And the last time I visited the park, I got a good 5 rides in a row just lapping it because it was just so much fun. But speaking of fun coasters, we'll now move on to 23, and this is Manta at SeaWorld San Diego, a mock multi-launch family coaster, and this is one of the most re-rideable things I have ever been on. I could literally ride it for hours and hours and hours and probably not get bored. It's not the most insane thing in the world, but it does have some more intense moments, and I would probably say it's my favorite family coaster, at least in California. But keeping it in California, let's go to 22, and this is Full Throttle at Six Flags Magic Mountain, a premier multi-launch coaster with, at one point, was the tallest vertical loop in the world, which gives some insane hang time. Honestly, the best hang time moment, I would argue, in all of California. Not to mention some amazing airtime coming off the top hat, especially near the back, and also the fact that it is ridiculously smooth and just super enjoyable and fun. But moving just across the park now, we go to 21, which is Apocalypse the Ride, the GCI wooden coaster that was recently retracked. And man, if you are near the back of the train, it is a fantastic ride that has some really great elements, including a first drop that's awesome, a stangle dive even, and a station flyby. I've always loved Apocalypse, and that's why it's my first wooden coaster on this list. Now moving on to number 20 is another B&M floorless coaster, but all the way in Ohio, and that is ROUGAROU at Cedar Point, which I would argue has one of the best layouts of any coaster I have ever experienced. But I've always been a sucker for old stand-up layouts, but with the new floorless trains, especially in the back, it is ridiculously smooth and intense and has some really great whippy elements, and that's why I love ROUGAROU, and it's definitely a must-hit for me at Cedar Point. But moving on to 19, sadly, this is the first coaster that is no longer operating on this list, and I believe the only coaster of that nature, and this is Screamer from Scandia, Ontario, which I rode at the very beginning of this year on the last day of operation for that park. Now, the coaster has been disassembled as of now, but we have no idea what its future holds. Hopefully someone has purchased this amazing ride that, while it is kind of janky and is the tallest and fastest coaster that E&F Myler had ever built, it gives some insane airtime and laterals and head choppers that I would argue are some of the best of those kinds of moments I have ever experienced. But man, I miss this ride and I hope it comes back very soon. Anyways, moving on to the number 18 spot, which I would actually say is very similar to Screamer. This is Gemini back at Cedar Point, which is a dueling aero coaster that I would describe as really just a mine train on steroids. It has the same type of weird bonkers ejector airtime on it, and it is smoother than Screamer, I would say, and also it has that added element of dueling. And Gemini, I would argue, is one of the most underrated coasters of all time. But moving on to number 17, a coaster that not many people have been able to ride, but this is Switchback at ZDT's amusement park in Seguin, Texas. This is a gravity group wooden coaster that is actually a shuttle coaster, meaning that it's not a complete circuit. You actually go through all the way to a near vertical spike and then go backwards through the ride. It gives some amazing intense turns, as well as some awesome head choppers and ejector airtime. This ride was absolutely stellar and my first Zen ride ever too. And I would definitely say it's worth the 45-minute to an hour drive from San Antonio proper. But next up at number 16, I have Gatekeeper, again at Cedar Point in Sandusky, Ohio. This was my first B&M wing coaster and I absolutely adored it. It gives some awesome, graceful movement throughout the track layout, as well as some amazing near miss elements, as well as being one of the most photogenic coasters I have ever seen. It's forceful, it's graceful, it's fast, it's fun, and it's re-rideable. What more could you ask? Now, number 15 is a ride I sadly did not get to ride this year, and that is Joker at Six Flags Discovery Kingdom, the RMC hybrid coaster that is just ridiculously fun. This is actually the lowest rated RMC for me, but the fact that it's number 15 I think says a lot about their work. It doesn't have the best airtime, but I would say it has some stellar inversions, as well as some whippy turns that are really enjoyable in whatever seat you're in. But moving just about an hour south, we're going to California's Great America for Gold Striker at number 14, which is a GCI wooden coaster that is just insane. This is Apocalypse, but with even more not knowing where you're going. It has one of the best layouts on a coaster, I would argue, and with its awesome tunneling, as well as whippy turns and awesome ejector airtime, it was at one point my favorite coaster in Northern California. But moving back down to Southern California, we have at number 13, Tatsu, the flying coaster at Six Flags Magic Mountain. Man, this ride is graceful. It's my favorite B&M roller coaster that I have ever ridden, and that's just because it is insanely graceful. It feels like you are flying. And that's not just because it's a flying coaster. If you're sitting in the front row, it literally feels like you have become a dragon. And you're just getting some beautiful views of the park in your free time before, of course, the most insane inversion I can think of, and that is the pretzel loop, which just feels like it's gonna squish you until you can't breathe anymore. But Tatsu is really a standout, and it has actually fallen a little bit in my rankings as of the past couple months, but don't be surprised if it jumps right back up again in the future. Now at number 12, we have something else in Southern California, and this is actually at Knott's Berry Farm, Accelerator, which is the first hydraulic launch coaster by Intamin, and this ride packs a real punch. This is my favorite launch of all time, not to mention some amazing airtime on the top hat, as well as some awesome forces on those overbank turns. I know a lot of people that would rank Top Thrill Dragster over Accelerator. Now, personally, I would not, just because I like the launch on Accelerator more, and I feel like there's a lot more to offer on it as well. But Accelerator, as of now, is still my favorite launch coaster. But moving on to number 11, another gravity group wooden coaster, this one in Pennsylvania, Erie to be more specific, is Ravine Flyer 2 at Waldameer. Now, I was actually expecting a lot from this ride, and I was honestly kind of blown away. This has one of the most scenic and amazing views I've ever seen at any park or anywhere, not to mention some amazing airtime as well as terrain interaction that does really make this ride feel kind of relentless at times. Now, it would be a little higher if it wasn't as rough in sections, and I would say if it was as smooth as could be, it would probably be my favorite wooden coaster of all time. But moving into the top 10 now, we travel to Farmington, Utah at Lagoon for Cannibal, which at the time of its opening was the steepest coaster in North America. And I know I might get a little flack for ranking it this high, but that first drop is insane at 116 degrees, not to mention the amazing lagoon roll, which I would argue is the best hang time moment I have ever experienced. This ride was really my top reason for visiting Lagoon last year, and man, did it make that trip completely worth it. It is a fantastic coaster, and I can't wait to go back to Lagoon for Primordial, and of course, to get more rides on Cannibal. But moving to number 9, we have an Aero Hypercoaster, the first Hypercoaster as well, and this is Magnum XL 200. And I will say this has the most extreme airtime I have ever had the joy, as well as insane fear of experiencing. Magnum is one of those rides that involuntarily made me scream, and is definitely a ride that I would love to go back to enjoy in the near future. Now at number 8, this was one that I was really struggling with, but I think I've settled on number 8 as of right now, but don't be surprised if this climbs into the top 5 soon. This is X2 at Six Flags Magic Mountain, which is a 4D coaster built by Aero, and it is absolutely bonkers in every sense of the word. A near vertical 215-foot drop with you facing straight down, which leads into some amazing flips and turns and makes you feel discombobulated in every way possible. X2 is one of the most insane coasters I've ever been on. I would actually argue it is the most insane coaster I've been on. And as of right now, I would actually argue in the past 6 months, it is my favorite coaster at Magic Mountain. But combining it with all the experiences I've had over the years, as of right now, it would probably sit at my number 2. And that's mainly just because it does have a little bit of a rougher ride. But speaking of a ride that used to be rough and is no longer, Ghost Rider at Knott's Berry Farm is my number 7. And this ride just has a fantastic layout by CCI, as well as some really intense airtime moments, and not to mention it is ridiculously long in duration. Oh yeah, and there's this little thing called Scary Farm night rides at 3 in the morning. Oh, honestly, one of the best night rides ever. But moving back to Ohio and Cedar Point specifically, at number 6, I have the world's first Giga Coaster, Millennium Force. Millennium Force is just ridiculously quick and smooth and graceful and forceful and filled with airtime. And while I know it has been dropping in a lot of people's rankings over the past decade, this was my first Giga Coaster, and I would definitely say is one of my favorite coasters of all time. If there was only one coaster I had to ride the rest of my life, it would probably be Millie, but if that was the case, I'd just hope there wouldn't be too many bugs out. But anyways, moving on to number 5, I've actually combined 2 separate coasters into one this year. That's because they're technically the same model, but it's hard to differentiate the two for me after my last rides on both of them. And that is Railblazer at California's Great America, as well as Wonder Woman Golden Lasso Coaster at Six Flags Fiesta, Texas. These are both RMC Raptor models. They're pretty much clones except for a mirrored layout as well as a couple extra feet on Railblazer. But these are some of the most intense rides I have ever experienced, especially in the back row, and they are also ridiculously smooth and non-stop. There is no time to breathe in that 30-second period after detaching from the lift hill and getting to the brake run. They both feature some of my favorite airtime moments, as well as even inversions and I cannot wait for more Raptor models to be built in the future. I would actually argue that the Raptor model is my favorite model as of right now. But anyways, moving on to number 4, we go back to Six Flags Magic Mountain for Twisted Colossus, the dueling Mobius Loop RMC hybrid coaster that at the time it was built was the longest of its kind. And I do have more rides on this coaster in specific at Magic Mountain than any other, and there's a reason for that. It's super smooth, has amazing ejector airtime, and of course every once in a while you get an incredible duel that vaults this coaster to a top tier. Now, if you remember me saying right now I'd probably put X2 over Twisted Colossus, that's just because I have not dueled in a very long time, and I found the magic seat on X2 for me. But overall, looking back at my rides in the past, Twisted Colossus has always been up there, and I think it'll at least be in my top 10 for probably a decade to come. But moving on to my number 3, we're going back to Texas at Fiesta, Texas in specific for Iron Rattler, another RMC hybrid coaster, which has my favorite drop of all time. Not to mention an amazing layout, an amazing terrain interaction, and while it's over quite quick, it packs all of the perfect elements back to back to back. And earlier this year, this was my favorite coaster of all time, until I took a little trip to a peninsula in Ohio and was able to experience my only non-RMC in my top 5, and that is Maverick at my number 2, which, oh my goodness, when I first came off this ride, I was muttering to myself that I think this is my new number 1. Now, a couple more rides later and a back row night ride, I just have to barely put it over Iron Rattler for its amazing intensity as well as really cool interaction with the area. And of course, one of my favorite elements of all time, that final Stangle dive. Maverick just beats out Iron Rattler for my number 2 spot. And I think the next answer for a lot of you is obvious for my number 1, and that is right next door to Maverick. Steel Vengeance, the RMC Hyper Hybrid coaster, has taken my number 1 spot overall. And I'll be completely honest with you, it doesn't have my favorite elements of all time. It just has so many elements and is so incredibly long, with at least having some really great elements, that it beats out every other coaster that I have ridden thus far. But Steel Vengeance is really another type of beast, and I absolutely loved this coaster. And RMC did a fantastic job with creating, at least at this point in time, what I would consider to be one of the world's best roller coasters. But anyways, I am very excited to see what you guys think of my list, and I also want to know what your guys' top 5 are down in the comments below. But if you did enjoy this video, make sure to subscribe, because we're going to have tons more like this, as well as reviews and vlogs and updates on new rides coming to Southern California in the near future. So you definitely won't want to miss out on that. But it has been an amazing year here at Parks Bros. We've gained many thousand subscribers. And I do want to say, just before heading off, a very, very happy new year to everyone. I hope 2020 is the year for everybody, that everything ends up taking a turn in the right direction. And hopefully I'll get to meet a heck of a lot of you at the parks next year as well. But until then, we'll see you on the next ride.